Welcome to the Praise podcast for the 14th of April 2019. Moromai, good morning. I'm Judith Lay and this is Praise, the programme that connects faith and daily life.
Manx Radio.
It was the spring of AD 30 and on Sunday, the first day of the week, Jesus entered Jerusalem on a colt. He rode into the ancient capital city of the Jewish nation in a final and grand public demonstration for everyone to see. The huge crowds who lined the route were so excited they could hardly contain themselves. They were cheering and celebrating. Some even spread their coats on the dry and dusty road for him to ride over.
Today is Palm Sunday, the start of a week that the Christian Church calls Holy. Today we remember Jesus coming into Jerusalem, being hailed as a king and greeted with great excitement. 5 days later, the very same people were calling for Jesus to be nailed to a wooden cross and left hanging there to die. But the story didn't end there. In fact, it didn't end at all, but was completed on Easter Day when Jesus rose from the dead and opened for us the way to eternal life with him.
I will sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. How he left the realms of glory for the cross at Calvary. Yes, I'll sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. Sing it with his saints in glory, gathered by the crystal sea.
Looking back at his life on earth, I suppose in many respects Jesus could be seen as something of a failure. He was born into poverty and died like a common criminal. For most of his life, he worked as a humble carpenter in an obscure town called Nazareth. He didn't write any books, didn't have a family, didn't even travel very much. Most of the time, he seemed happiest wandering through the small towns and villages surrounding the coast of Galilee, preaching to the poor and unimportant. He didn't even have many friends. In fact, they all eventually abandoned him, and one of them even betrayed him. He was nailed to a cross in between two thieves, and while he was dying, his executioners gambled for his clothing, the only property that he had on earth. There were no wreaths or flowers at his grave, just a crown of thorns. Yet 3 days later, he was alive again, just as he'd promised, and that's the power of that very first Easter, when through his death and resurrection, Jesus took the punishment our sins deserve and made it possible for us to know God. You see, Jesus was and is the only way to God. His coming into the world proves that God cares and wants to get to know us all. This friendship with God is like a wonderful gift. Whoever, wherever you are, Jesus is for you.
Russell Bolter with an extract from King of the Hill, a reflection on the Easter story. I often think that, in musical terms, Lent and Easter are rather like Advent and Christmas. There are some wonderfully inspiring songs and hymns, but only a comparatively short time to enjoy them. So let's hear another, recalling Jesus' entry into Jerusalem on that first Palm Sunday. All glory, Lord, and honour to you, Redeemer King. That was the St. Michael Singers and the Palm Sunday hymn, All Glory, Lord, and Honour to you, Redeemer King. And we'll celebrate the most amazing part of the Easter story on our praise programme at this time next week. It's hardly surprising that the events of Holy Week and Easter would inspire composers over the years to write music for this season that's at the very heart of the Christian faith. John Henry Maunder was a church organist in London and started his career writing operettas for the theatre. Later, he devoted himself to writing only sacred music. His oratorio, The Martyrs, became a great favourite, but it's Olivet to Calvary which has remained popular through the generations, because it has a sincerity that speaks to all ages, and a simplicity that enables it to be performed by even quite a small choir. There are also hymns for the congregation to join in. Olivet to Calvary recalls the scenes that mark the last few days of Christ's life on earth. Part 1 starts with Christ's jubilant journey to Jerusalem and ends with the scene on the Mount of Olives. Part 2 begins with the Feast of Passover, with Christ's commandment to his disciples to love one another, and ends with the crucifixion at Calvary. And you can hear it this week because it's being performed in Ramsey on Thursday evening. Here's a little taste of some of the music.
Be
shall find rest unto your souls. Come unto him, ye that are weary. Come, come, come.
Just a little of the music from Maunder's sacred cantata, Olivet to Calvary, and it'll be performed on Thursday evening in the United Reformed Church on Waterloo Road in Ramsey by the Passiontide Chorale under the direction of John Elliott, with soloists Jeff Collier and Michael Corkill and organist David Greenwood. It starts on Thursday evening at 7:30 and admission is free, with a warm welcome for everyone. Another beautiful work composed specially for this time of the year is Stainer's Crucifixion, and you can hear that performed by the Manx Festival Chorus this afternoon at 3:00 in St Matthew's Church on the North Quay here in Douglas. Nicholas Roberts and Nathan Smith are the soloists, John Riley is the organist, and the conductor is John Bethel, and admission is £10. And they say things come in threes, don't they? And our third musical treat this week is the good news that the Broughton Boys Choir are back on the island. And a little later in the programme, I'll tell you when and where you can meet them over the coming days. But first, a little history lesson. Broadway Baptist Church is a very familiar sight, almost opposite the side gates of the Villa Marina here in Douglas. Its history goes back to the late 1800s, when a group of people who had a passion to share the love of God put up a wooden building on Broadway, and under the leadership of Reverend Westlake, rapidly outgrew that first humble home, and so they set about building the church that we see today. Through the years that followed, the church was a strong presence in Douglas, but by 1981, church membership had dwindled and there was even talk of closure. But through the arrival and subsequent ministry of a young Ulsterman, the church saw considerable growth over the following years, to the extent that, on Whit Sunday in 1993, Broadway Baptist Church celebrated its centenary by reopening a completely refurbished building, and around about the same time purchased 2 guest houses adjacent to the church and transformed them into the Alpha Centre, a place of new beginnings. In the early 2000s, Broadway's ministry continued under the able leadership of Reverend Graham Derbyshire, and he was followed in 2012 by Reverend Bill Leishman, who continues to lead Broadway Baptist Church, maintaining a strong spiritual presence alongside dedicated service to the community. But this morning, I'm welcoming to the programme that young Ulsterman, none other than the Reverend David Gordon, who very kindly made time to have a chat with me during a brief visit to the island recently. David, it's lovely to see you again.
And it's lovely to be here. I just think it's probably 18 years since I was last in the studios of Manx Radio.
Now, when you left the island, David, you went to develop your ministry in the Baptist Church nationally. What were you doing?
Yes, I went to work in Glasgow, partly to oversee the ministry within the Baptist churches throughout the whole of Scotland. My official title was National Mission Advisor, but basically what that meant was I went round to different churches almost like a consultant, trying to get the church to think through how they could be most effective in the 21st century. Essentially, it was trying to say, look, in the 21st century, in a secular Scotland, where many people are disengaged from church, how do we encourage the church to be most effective?
That kind of thing is never easy, but it often comes more readily accepted when it comes from somebody outside our church.
Yeah, absolutely. But that was only true for a couple of years, because once I'd been there a couple of years, then you became part of the institution as well. But yes, I think it was helpful because I was the first person from outside Scotland to be part of the national leadership team in Scotland. So I think it was helpful coming in from the outside, and obviously bringing my own experience from the Isle of Man as well, because as you'll remember, in the Isle of Man we were very much involved in community ministries, in school, in prison and different things. And so we were able to bring some of the experience and some of what I'd learned here and applied into church situations over in Scotland as well. Yeah.
But a lot of thinking on your feet, I should imagine, because everywhere you go is going to be slightly different.
Absolutely. Probably that's something that I was going to say ministers are relatively good at, but maybe it's because I'm Irish, the Irish blarney. But yet you do have to think on your feet.
So after you did that, you then went back into parish life?
Yes, I went back into a Baptist church in Kirkintilloch, which is just on the north side of Glasgow. And most people will have never heard of it, and yet its name is printed all over the Isle of Man. So, for example, if you go to the entrance into the Manx Museum, there's a red telephone box at the entrance gate. And if you look at the back of it, it'll say, made in the Lion Foundry in Kirkintilloch. So the vast majority of the old rail telephone boxes were made in foundries in Kirkintilloch. And so we went into, yes, a fairly large congregation, but again, congregation that had become quite inward looking in many ways. I used to always say, the church is one of the few organisations on earth that doesn't exist for the benefit of its own members. And so we have a calling to reach out to those beyond our walls. And so over the last 10 years especially, we've been involved in a number of different outreach programs and community initiatives to help us to engage with the people out with the church. Yeah. Even people that aren't particularly switched on by church respond to a loving demonstration of the gospel. See, sometimes we forget when we read all about the miracles of Jesus and so on. But actually, in one of the sermons that was given in the book of Acts, it simply says, Jesus went about doing good. And in a sense, we want to use that as our example, as our motivation, that as a church, we just go about our community doing good. Not necessarily to get bums and seats, but just to demonstrate something of the love and compassion of God. And as we do that, people ask questions. Why are you doing it? What's your motivation? And so people sometimes not only receive food, but also in the end come to know something of the faith that we have as well. Yeah.
In the area of Kirkintilloch, where would you say the greatest need is for you?
There are a number of pinch points. Firstly, there are areas where there is significant social deprivation. We have just a couple of years ago started what we call an Eden team, where 6 people have literally moved house to live in this housing scheme, because we believe that it's not just about rushing in and rushing out again like most professionals do, but these people are seeking to live incarnationally amongst the people they're trying to reach. But it's low-key and long-term and a relational commitment to that area. And it's a matter of just coming in and living amongst the people trying to live out our faith. But on the other side, we have some areas which are the most affluent areas in the whole of Scotland. In fact, the life expectancy from the housing schemes to the most affluent areas changes by 7 or 8 years. So one of the areas adjacent to the church is the town of Lindsay. People there are very affluent. And sometimes actually those people are less interested in spiritual dynamic than those who are struggling with social needs, because they don't feel they have any real need themselves. But actually the problems in terms of loneliness, in terms of identity, in terms of just understanding their purposes in the world are every bit as real in those areas as in the poor areas. Yeah.
But David, those people who are actually prepared to move house and go and live, that's real love. To give up what you've got and go and live within a completely different community, a very challenging community.
I mean, we have a young couple with 3 children in their early 30s who lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom detached house. And they sold it and moved into this housing scheme, living in a 3-bedroom, very compact terraced house in a very difficult area where there's lots of dysfunctional families, where there's lots of drug addiction, where it's probably not safe for the kids to walk around at night time. And they've actually sold their house because they feel this is what God wants them to do, to try and live out the faith, not just talk about it, but to do it authentically, an active, practical demonstration of God's love. Yeah.
Well, that is certainly something for us to think very, very deeply and reflect on. And I'm quite sure that as a church community, you are underpinning these people with a lot of prayer.
Absolutely. And I know we'll come on to it later, but it's one of the things that I find so challenging about Vincent, because he had the same qualities. He had a real passion for those who were the underclass in society.
I'm talking here to Reverend David Gordon about his ministry as pastor of a Baptist church in Kirkintilloch on the north side of Glasgow. But did you hear another name come into our conversation there? Let's listen again.
I know we'll come on to it later, but it's one of the things that I find so challenging about Vincent, because he had the same qualities. He had a real passion for those who were the underclass in society.
And the Vincent that David mentioned there is the clue to David's reason for being on the island a while ago. He came to lead a Saturday session for the Island Spirituality Network, talking about the painter Vincent van Gogh, someone whose life David studied during a sabbatical last year. What he discovered is a compelling, thought-provoking story about a man whose highly prized artwork is recognised around the world, but who never actually wanted to be an artist. David tells the story with skill and passion, and it'll be the main feature on this programme in a couple of weeks' time. I promise you, you will enjoy it. That's the beautiful voices of the choir of the Church of St John the Baptist in Broughton, Lancashire, known affectionately on the island as the Broughton Boys Choir. And they're back with us now. After no fewer than 46 annual visits, the Isle of Man still remains the number one choice of venue for the annual training course for the boy choristers of Broughton Parish Church. As in previous years, around 20 choristers will spend a week together developing their musical skills and, just as importantly, having great fun in their off-duty moments. Swimming, playing beach football, going to the Venture Centre and exploring the island's heritage sites. Also, every day they'll be singing in a different church around the island, and you're warmly invited to share in these very special services. Today they're singing twice. This morning they'll sing for the Eucharist at 11 o'clock in St Thomas's Church in Finch Road here in Douglas. Then this evening they'll be in St Paul's Church in Ramsey for evensong at 6:30. The rest of their Holy Week services will all start at 8 p.m. Tomorrow, Monday, they'll be in St Lupus, Maloo Parish Church. On Tuesday, they'll be in the Cathedral in Peel, and their last service will be here in Douglas, in St Matthew's on the North Quay. That's on Wednesday the 17th. Those evening services on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday all start at 8 p.m. And at all the services, the boys will be accompanied by the very talented young Broughton organ scholar Harry Spencer, and of course, the man who makes this all possible but shies away from taking any credit for it, the choir's inspirational musical director, the wonderful John Catterall. And I'm afraid that's all that we have time for this week. Don't forget to take a look at the Praise blog, the home of our church notice board, full of Holy Week and Easter special services and events. Go to manxradio.com, on the homepage, click On Air, and on the drop-down menu, follow the link for blogs. Thank you for listening to this week's Praise podcast. There's a new Praise podcast available every Sunday morning. You can subscribe for free at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts and Spotify via the Manx Radio smartphone app or at manxradio.com. So, till we meet again, this is Judith saying thank you for your company, and I wish you and those you love every blessing in the days ahead.